Welcome to Monday Next. We are two siblings with two different businesses, but we only have honest conversations.
I'm Scott Monday, founder of Kitchen and Bath Crate, where we've turned construction chaos into systematic excellence with guaranteed timelines and results that break every industry rule.
And I'm Meredith Monday Schwartz, CEO of Here Comes the Guide, a wedding venue platform built on relationships instead of commissions, run by an all-women team that proves heart-forward business practices actually work.
We're siblings who spent 15 years challenging each other's business philosophies, and we finally decided to hit record.
No guests, no fluff, just the conversations we'd be having anyway. But now you get to listen in. Whether you're team heart forward or team systems first, we are here to show you the business doesn't have to be boring, generic, or divorced from reality.
This is Monday Next. All right, Mayor, we are diving into a topic today that I am morbidly curious about because you and I have talked about this over the years, but we've never really, to my recollection, dove into the details. And this is the fact that you are a completely employee-owned company at Here Comes the Guide.
Right, exactly. Our structure is an ESOP, an employee stock ownership program. Our company is owned by the trust, which is the ESOP, and then we all have shares within that trust.
Yeah, this will be very interesting because, as you know, I am the sole owner of Kitchen and Bath Crate and TBS. I do have a partner in a separate business, but I've never been in this world of an ESOP. I remember hearing a very successful entrepreneur up in Sacramento maybe 10 years ago discuss his company's transition to an ESOP, and that was a great presentation. But I'm interested to hear from someone that actually has led a company through it as you did, and then seeing the results over the last number of years. So we're going to dive into that today. Really looking forward to that topic. But before we do that, Meredith, I would love to hear a little bit about what was your Monday moment from this past week. What do you got for me?
Well, this one is a personal win, and it happened this morning. And this is something that's a win because I am an extraordinarily disciplined person by nature, except when I have to get up early in the morning to work out. I lack discipline in this one area. So
how early is early?
It's not your kind of early. It's my early. It's early
give me
for
an
me.
idea.
It's 6:30, which I realize in the CEO, founder, entrepreneur world is not early.
Well, that's 4:30 my time, which is very early. So let's just go with that.
It's early. It's early. I should have said that. 4:30 California time. No, it's 6:30, and I don't like it. I don't like having to hit the ground running fast. I like a little bit of a slow boil in my morning. But on these several mornings a week, I have hired a trainer. And so I got to get up and I got to go. And I didn't want to do it this morning, but I heard your voice in my head saying, sister, get up out of this bed and go do what needs to be done because you will be better for it, for your company later if you've worked out today. And it's absolutely true. So it was a personal win, but I just want to normalize that not everybody has the same amount of discipline in all the disciplines of their life. Because I know you get up early, you've gotten up early you've always, even since you were small, you were an early riser. So that's not something you struggle with. Is there a place where you struggle with discipline?
I really like food. If I get something in front of me, like if we get, what would be a good example? Let's say that we had a cheesecake, right? And then someone brings it over, like a guest comes over, they bring cheesecake, we have cheesecake, and then there's like a quarter of a cheesecake left, and then everybody leaves. I might be in the kitchen squaring it off, quote unquote, until it's gone.
Gone, right?
Yeah. Which is why I'm doing Whole30 to start the year. Whole30 is like an elimination diet. But for me, it's more just a reset to start the year and kind of get that discipline back. But you're right. I think we almost have like a discipline fuel tank. And then sometimes by the end of the day, it's out. So the nights are tough. Or maybe you wake up in a bad spot, so you don't have any fuel in the tank from the beginning. But don't you think that there's almost like a discipline meter, right?
Yeah, I think there's absolutely a discipline tank. I think for me, it is less parsed out over the course of a day and more parsed out over all the things I need to give my time and attention and discipline to. And when I have too many irons on that fire, then that's when I start seeing myself be like, you know what? I'm tired. I worked until 11 o'clock last night. I don't need to get up. I'd rather stay in bed and read. that kind of thing. So I'm working on it. But it is true that when I get up and do what I need to do, I feel a lot better.
Yeah, for sure. My Monday moment was last week. This was last Thursday. I had a chance to go. It was literally in and out of Las Vegas in 20 hours, but I had a chance to speak to an EO, Entrepreneurs Organization group called an Accelerator group. So these were people from around the Western United States, and they are all business owners with sub $2 million revenue businesses. Some EOA chapters are sub 1 million, some are sub 2, but all these were at least sub 2. And I had a chance to chat with them, and the talk was great. And, it's kind of like this David versus Goliath talk. And I thought the audience was very engaging. Sometimes when you speak, the audience is looking back at you with dead eyes, especially if you speak to like youth, right? But this group was engaged. They were collaborative. It was very much like a Q&A format along the way because it was 2 hours, right? This long presentation. But the moment for me, I guess the 5%, right, that really impacted me was just this continual realization that when I'm in that scenario of standing in front of a group and teaching and thinking through issues together and riffing back and forth, Meredith, the time goes by so fast. It is crazy. And 2 hours is like 2 minutes. And it's just this flow state that I don't achieve literally anywhere else in my life. And so, if you have a moment like that, it's definitely the Monday moment, right?
Yeah. And something you need to pay a lot of attention to. I talk a lot with my staff about figuring out, when do you get into that flow state in your work? What's the work that you're doing that makes you look up and all of a sudden 2 hours have passed? Because I think it's such an important indicator of where you need to be spending more of your time. Often that's not only what feels the easiest, but it also is what brings the most ease and joy. And it's also what you're best at, maybe where your superpowers are. I feel that way when I'm having what I call venue one-on-ones with my clients. I'll have these 90-minute conversations with clients, and we'll really be chopping up some challenge that the client is dealing with. And I just feel like the time goes by so fast. And at the end of it, I am so much more energized than I was when I started. So these are all indicators that I really like to look at. But I've seen you in pictures and in video when you're doing that. And it is clear to me that that is something that just brings you a ton of joy. I love to see it.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. All right, Meredith, tool time. Let's talk about a tool that you've been using that you want to share with the listeners out there and with me, please.
Yes. So my tool this week is Wispr Flow. Have I told you about this one?
I do not recall talking about it.
Okay. It's Wispr, Wispr Flow, and it's a piece of software, and it does something that when I tell you what it does, you're going to be like, I don't need that because I already have that. You do need it. It's a better way to do voice to text. So once you install it, I press the function key on my laptop, and while I'm pressing it, I just talk. I use it tons for emails, but I use it for all kinds of writing. Obviously, anything that you need to dictate what you're thinking into text. And the reason it is a better solution than just the natural voice to text that your computer has is that it is very smart. It is AI driven. You will not be surprised to find. And it's smarter the more you use it. So when you are finished, it will have formatted what you've said in a really smart way. It will have bullet pointed something that should be bullet pointed. It will have put in quotes. It will put in italics. It will put in proper spellings of things. It also learns from you. So for example, the word ESOP, which we're going to be saying a lot today, Whisperflow, as I was working on our rundown for today's show, quickly asked me, by the way, every time you say what I think is ESOP, AESOP, like Aesop's Fables, right? You are correcting it to ESOP, ESOP, an acronym. And so it automatically realized every time I say that, it's going to correct it. I'm never going to have to tell it that again. So it's a very smart tool. And for how much I use it, I looked at my stats and I'm using it upwards of 50 times a day. And it is saving me demonstrable amounts of time in editing what it is that I have spoken into whatever I'm trying to do. So Whisperflow, I really, really find it useful.
Fantastic. I will check that out. I use a lot of the voice to text on ChatGPT, both on my phone and on the web application, and then on Gemini as well. But I've noticed that chat is substantially better at transcribing than Gemini, which is weird. But yeah, this will be great because those have nothing to do with cross-platform or Word documents or things like that, where it could come in super handy.
Well, and I use it on my phone too. It's on my laptop and it's on my phone. It's everywhere.
Gotcha.
And yes, I'm using Claude to help me actually write a business book. And so every day I spend 10 minutes having Claude ask me questions. And then I'm just speaking into my computer and it's formatting everything really, really well. So it makes that super easy.
Cool. Awesome. As you were talking, I just got this mental image of your company running on ESOP, as in the fables.
Which would be fun. That would be fun.
I was like, how exactly is that going to work? But anyway, all right. On to our main topic, Meredith. I'm guiding this show today, and I would love to at least at some point talk through the chronology of this transition, because I really follow things better if it's sort of linear. That won't surprise anybody because I'm a weirdo. But if you don't mind, let's describe what the ESOP actually is and the why behind it. And then I'd love to walk through this transition from when it first became a potential option, even through today when you've been running it for a number of years. So let's first set the table. What is an ESOP and what was the why behind it?
Okay, so an ESOP is, again, an employee stock ownership program. So this is a specific legal structure, and it has very specific rules that are overseen by the federal government. So as the head of the ESOP, I have fiduciary responsibility for lots of different things. So it's a highly controlled legal structure. And so our company is owned by this ESOP. It's a trust. And every employee who meets certain tenure and hours requirements owns shares in the company. So for us, once you've worked for us for a full calendar year, and as long as you work 1,000 hours a year, then you slowly vest in over the first 6 years. So you're become eligible in a year, then for 5 years you vest in with more percentages over the course of each year. And those shares accumulate over time. And then when an employee leaves or retires, those shares get bought back by the company. And the person then can take their buyout, which is done over the course of time to make it easier on the company. And those are usually sent over to a retirement fund, like a 401k, once we send those over. So they're retirement funds.
Okay, so just to make sure that I understand, the ESOP itself is a legal entity that owns, here comes the guide, and then you and the vested employees own the shares of that ESOP.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, cool. Go ahead.
As far as the reason it came into play is this, and I think that there's a lot of companies that are dealing with this particular kind of situation. Back in 2008, our founder, Lynn Broadwell, realized that she could see down the road, it ended up being 2017 when this happened, but she could see down the road that she was going to want to be able to exit the company. She was coming to that time of her life where she wanted to be able to do that. But she also knew that she didn't want to sell the company outright to like a competitor. But then she thirdly knew that the people she would want to sell it to, the employees, like I didn't have $3 million to write a check and buy it so that I was the new owner. So she was really smart in that she went out and got some really, really good advice. And this structure was given to us as a possibility, saying, hey, it basically sets the company up to make it easier for the employees to own it and for the founder to exit while also getting their cash for the company. And that is exactly why we set it up. And that's exactly what it did. It was a very, very good instrument to enable us, a group of people who did not have a gigantic check to write, to purchase the company from our founder in 2017.
Makes a ton of sense. Let's walk through a few of like the criteria that a company would need to have before they could consider something like this. The first you already mentioned, which is a founder that wants to exit. I imagine also it could be a partial exit. I imagine they could also probably retain shares if they wished in the ESOP, would be my guess. I think that's how it worked with another entrepreneur that exited in that way. But anyway, so you need a founder that's wanting to exit in some way. And then you also need sufficient profitability, right, for the company to service, in essence, the payoff or the purchase or the loan. Or walk through that. Does the company or the ESOP get a loan to pay the founder, or what are the mechanisms behind the actual movement of cash back and forth?
Right. So what we did, and again, I can't speak to ESOPs as a whole. I don't have that kind of foundation, but I can speak to the way that we handled it, which is that we had a $3 million valuation when we did the buyout from Lynn. And so we got the company valued by a third party. We got that valuation, and then we were able to take half of that money, which was already in the ESOP, because over those 9 years, we had been saving toward that. And we were able to immediately liquidate those shares for Lynn. And then she took that $1.5 million in cash from her shares in the ESOP. And then also we took out $1.5 million loan, just a standard business loan, because interest rates were really, really low. And so the company took that loan out, and then we paid that $1.5 million to her. So then we spent the next 4 years paying off that $1.5 million loan, and yes, sufficient profitability. So one of the big advantages of the ESOP structure is that it gives you a lot of tax savings. So at the end of the year, you can take any amount of profit. There's some rules as to how much you can do it. It has to do with percentage of payroll, but you can take your profit and you can put it as much as you're allowed into the ESOP. And I work every year with an ESOP administrator who's always been the one working with us. And he helps me know exactly how much we really need to be putting in as our contribution to service the ESOP as a whole, right? When people leave and we have to pay out and do all those kinds of things. So I work with him. Every year, we have not had any trouble taking the first amount of our profit and we put it into the ESOP. That's our cash contribution. There was a year where we couldn't do that, and that was the year 2020, where we knew that we needed to batten down the hatches because we didn't know what was going to happen. Our fiscal year ends on March 31st, so we were just a couple weeks into the pandemic in 2020 when I had to make that decision. ESOPs give you a lot of play. They give you a lot of cushion and wiggle room because the ESOP is for the benefit of the company and its employees. The ESOP does not want to strap you so much that you can't do your business. So you have a lot of things that you can do legally within the bounds of the ESOP based on what's happening within your business. So for example, that year, I went to Brian Turner, who's our ESOP administrator, and he said, you know what? Yes, this year, that cash contribution that you would normally do, we want to keep that in the business, in your operating funds, because we don't know what the next year is going to bring. And the ESOP gives you the ability to do that. There's no penalty for that. There's no problem with that. Part of that is that when you pay out employees, you pay them over the course of 10 years after they leave. So again, it's all structured to make it easy for the company to be able to live up to its responsibilities. And that is really definitely the way that it has played out in the years since 2017 that I've been running the company.
Yeah, this is very interesting to me. You don't have to give me exact years because sometimes it's difficult to think back what happened in what exact year, but it seems like a multi-year process from start to finish on this type of transaction. Walk me through, here comes the guide's process that created this ESOP from day one, we're doing this, until founder completely exited and paid off.
Well, I'm going to admit that in 2008, when we started the ESOP, I was running the company. I was operations, but Lynn was the one who was really talking with our different kinds of advisors, attorneys, and ESOP administrators and doing all of that. So definitely keeping me abreast of kind of the why behind the ESOP, but I wasn't the one actually doing that work until I took over as trustee when we bought her out in 2017. And at that point, then all of this became my responsibility. One question that a lot of people ask that I think is a really interesting part of this kind of employee ownership is this. So the question is, okay, but if everyone owns your company, How do you guys make any decisions if everyone can weigh in on decisions? That is not how an ESOP works. So the mechanism behind the control of the company is this. In our company, we have 100 shares that exist outside of the trust. They are the only 100 shares that exist outside of the trust. Whoever owns those shares owns control of the company. I don't own the company, but Lynn decided that I would be her successor, that I would be her CEO, and she sold me those 100 shares, which I bought with my own money. So obviously this is very symbolic. These shares are not worth a great deal of money. They're just symbolic of control. So I am in charge of the company. There's only 3 things that I can't do unless I put it to a vote of all of the employees. And those 3 things are: I can't buy a company, I can't sell our company, and I can't spend more than $500,000 of cash at one time. So those are the only 3 things that I have to put through a pass-through vote.
What would the vote requirement look like if you wanted to do one of those 3 things?
A majority.
Okay, a majority of the shares, I would imagine.
Right, exactly. A majority of the shares. So we've never had to do any of those things. So I've never actually walked through that in real life. So day to day, the ESOP doesn't really affect any part of the way that we do business.
All right, so we've been talking about an ESOP from an ownership and management perspective, but let's flip it to I work for you, Meredith, as an example. I don't. Wish I did. Never hire me, though. Let's say I worked for you, and let's say I start on day 1. It's going to take me a year to start the vesting period. Is that correct?
That's right.
After that trigger, after vestment begins, how is that calculated, and what do I physically get, or what do I actually get? Do I get any real money? Is it put into an account? How do you talk to new employees about this thing, which might be challenging for one to get one's mind around if they're not in this world ever or often?
Right. I will say that the ESOP structure and all of its different machinations, which happen mostly in the background and which I take care of with the team that I work with, is complicated. And so once a year, every person who's vested into the ESOP gets a copy of a statement from our ESOP administrator. And every year we get the company valued. So first, we close out our finances for the fiscal year, all of our taxes, and all of that gets sent to our business valuator, which is an independent third party. They do a big meeting with me. They look at all of our financials. We talk about the entire landscape and challenges and opportunities for the business. Then we get a new share price every year. And once we get the share price, then our ESOP administrator does a lot of calculations in the background and creates our ESOP statement. I then send those statements to every member of my staff, and we then have a meeting with our ESOP administrator where he walks us through the statement. Now, what's funny is this meeting is almost exactly the same every year. And usually it is 6 or 7 years into employment at Hopscotch Press before people start going, oh, I'm kind of understanding it's very complicated. The way that shares wash in and wash out and buyouts and distributions and all of this is very complicated because there's cash reserves and there's share amounts. But here's the shtick that I give to new employees. So you'll come in for the first year, you'll work a year, and then you'll begin to vest in. Over the course of the next 5 years, you vest in at an additional 20% each year. By the time you've gotten to the end of your 6th year, you are 100% vested, which means if you leave or retire, even if you're terminated, we will pay out what you've earned into the ESOP. Now, every year, we get that new valuation and we make a cash contribution into the ESOP. What we aim for is about 19% of the total salary amount for each employee. We put that amount, the company does, puts that amount into the ESOP for them. This is in terms of shares, but it's retirement money. These are going into retirement funds. We invest that money very safely. That's part of my responsibility. And so if they want to, we have a separate 401k option available to them if they want to do 401k savings for themselves, but we don't match the 401k because we put in these ESOP funds for which they don't have to do a match. It's just purely additional to everything we already give them. We put that into the ESOP for their portion of the ownership. And so the idea is that the more the share price goes up, the more those shares are worth to them. So the idea behind the ESOP, obviously, is that everyone knows, hey, I'm not just an employee, I'm also an owner, and I benefit over the course of time when the share price goes up. And I'd say that that is part of how we all know that we are working together to grow something together, which is an overall ethos for Here Comes the Guide.
Yeah. How does that play to the younger workers, though, in the fact that, if I make $50,000 a year, about $9,500 comes back to me, and it takes 6 years before I'd have full vestment. But how does that play with the younger workers who may have a retirement timeline and horizon that's in the decades, right?
I've even experienced this myself with the ESOP. When in 2008, I was almost 20 years younger than I am now. I was in my 30s. Now I'm 52 and looking down the barrel of retirement. And so it's become a lot more real to me. But there's no question that this is one of those things that comes into play. Until you are getting really close to retirement, the ESOP, like maybe most retirement savings, feels like funny money. Right? It feels like, sure, I see a statement every year, and I know that Meredith gives us information about how our share price did this year versus last year and all of that. But the actual benefit of it, especially for my youngest employees or for me when I was that age, definitely feels very removed, which is why we have separate things like profit sharing or quarterly bonusing. People want raises, those kinds of things. I can talk about the ESOP all the live long day, but it isn't as day-to-day incentivizing as hey, what's our profit share going to be at the end of this fiscal year, which is actual money that I can actually take to the bank and actually buy a house with, that kind of thing. So that is something that I think is the realistic part of an ESOP structure. When you're talking about setting up an ESOP, kind of big ESOP really will talk a lot about, well, they're all going to be employees. And so, yes, and you have to be realistic about how this actually lands, especially with your 20, 25, 30-year-old employee.
How often do you discuss this concept with the team? Is this something that comes up regularly or only on the annual or quarterly basis? And to what extent do you get a sense, Meredith, that it has affected behavior?
So we talk about it annually. It is one of our core values. One of our 12 core values is act like an owner because you are. I think where it comes up the most is around issues having to do with transparency. One of the reasons I think just being transparent as a boss, as a CEO, is a really good thing because it helps people trust you. Even if I didn't feel that way, I feel like with our ESOP structure, I owe these people transparency because they own the company too. I mean, I have shares within the company, but their shares are just as powerful as mine. So it comes up a lot because I feel that I owe them a lot of transparency as to how we're making decisions on what money we're going to spend, how much things cost. So when I talk, for example, about, like, let's say we're getting ready to design a new app, I'm not going to just tell my people, hey, guess what? New app coming down the line. I'm going to be like, hey, we're working with some developers and we just got a bid and it's going to be $250,000. So I'm actually going to give them a dollar amount. I might even talk about like, hey, we're going to do it on retainer and I might give them even more information than that because I feel that I owe it to them because they are owners. I don't think there's anybody at Here Comes the Guide that is like, I'm going to get up and do more and better work today because of my ESOP share value. I don't think that is at play. I think they are thinking, I'm going to get up and do more and better work today because I really love what we're doing at Here Comes the Guide. I love my clients and I really care about the team that I work with. That's just being totally honest about it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's really tough for all of us to really understand things that are that far out. If you're looking 20 years out for retirement, it's very difficult for us as humans to imagine what that's like in the future. And I think that's probably a disadvantage to an ESOP structure because it's massively advantageous to the team members, but it's so difficult for us to imagine that future when it's not a windfall at all. You know it's there, right? But once again, if you stay the course and keep contributing, being part of this team, you're going to benefit down the road, right?
Right. But it's not nearly as fun as like, oh, I just got X amount of money. I'm going to go buy a new Birkin, right? Like that's a lot more fun than, oh, my retirement savings is safely tucked away. And of course, once you hit 50, you start really looking down the barrel of like, okay, I could live another X number of years. Do I have all the money I need? But in my 30s, honestly, I was just trying to make it to the next paycheck.
Oh, for sure. So with that being a flaw of an ESOP, the fact that it's not right now money, does Here Come the Guide have a mechanism for scratching that itch with team members in more of a quarterly or an annual separate type of performance-based pay structure? Or is it pretty much we're all in on the ESOP and that's where the extra benefit comes in?
Right. So I really, really try to balance our profit based on, okay, what do we need to put into the ESOP in a perfect world? What's that dollar amount? We don't have to, but what's the dollar amount that would really help? And so the ESOP is always our first payment when we get to the end of the fiscal. And then the rest of it is profit that we share out. And that really is the piece that I think is the most motivating for people. And then we do have some quarterly performance incentives that we do. But that end of year profit share is really much more impactful to them.
Yeah, I would imagine. I love this topic. This is very interesting to me as the owner of a business and thinking through what a transition like this might look like. What questions would I need to ask myself to think through if this might be an option for me? Like you've been through it. If you were counseling another business owner or operator and they were considering this, what would be that checklist of questions that you would want them to sort of think through and answer?
I think the first thing I would think through is, do you have a plan for your own exit? Because not only were we able to exit Lynn using this, but this structure now is making it a lot easier for me to begin thinking about my own exit, right? So I can start thinking about who I want to sell my shares to for control of the company. And there's a mechanism for the company to pay me out upon retirement. I get to actually take that money out. So that is something that I'm really grateful for. So I would think about, what is the exit? Do you want to be purchased? Do you want to be acquired? That's one exit. Or do you want to be able to hand over your company to the people who currently work there? The ESOP can be a great structure to allow you to do that. The other thing that I would say is, you don't have to be a big company to have an ESOP. Now, again, I don't know all of the rules, but I know that when we did this, we were only worth $3 million. We're worth a lot more than that now. So you don't have to be large. Maybe there were 15 of us when we bought the company from Lynn. So that's another thing that I would think through. Those kinds of things. You know, are you looking for a lot of tax shelter? Like, do you have a lot of profit that would make sense to shelter in this way? I know there's a lot of interesting things that you can do if you're more of a founder owner like you are, that have to do with ESOPs can become S Corps. Right now we're a C Corp. They can become S Corps, and that can kind of change the structure and how taxes are handled. I know there's some interesting things that can be done that aren't right for Here Comes the Guide, but get a really good ESOP administrator that has done this. If you're interested in this and you interview some people, you're going to need an ESOP administrator to help you do this. When you interview them, make sure that they've done this at least 3 times and interview the leads of those 3 companies. Actually talk to them. Find out what is their experience of their ESOP being administered by that person, because I know that that makes a really big difference if you have somebody, an administrator, an evaluator that you really, really trust.
Yeah, it sounds like if you're an ESOP, your ESOP administrator / advisor is like a key advisor, just like your attorney and accountant, right?
Absolutely. That whole team. And that's the thing too, is that our ESOP administrator works with our tax people, because our tax people had never done taxes for an ESOP before. There was some learning that had to take place there. And so you need to get a good team around you. But if you do, it can be a really, really useful structure for buying your company from a founder and then also for an exit in the future.
Yeah. Back to the mechanism of how this works, it occurred to me, this sounds a little bit morbid, but what happens if Meredith gets hit by a bus? Or if Brad Pitt comes by and sweeps you off your feet?
Right. So at any point, I have made it clear in a variety of ways, including with our ESOP administrator, that my controlling shares would pass to Lisa Shields, who is my COO. So control of the company would easily be passed without any problem. Then my husband is my beneficiary for what I own inside the trust. A death benefit would then be triggered and the company would pay that out to my beneficiary.
Okay, so in essence, a proper structure here has a second string and perhaps even a third string. I mean, you and Lisa are close. I imagine you travel together. You know, the plane goes down. Is there like a...
We do have a third string because Lisa and I do travel together a lot. We do have a third string. And we also have key man insurance on ourselves. Okay. So if something happened to me, the company would be paid out from that key man insurance policy that would just give them that extra cushion to make sure that the transition took place in a way that just takes a little bit of the load off.
Yeah, can we call it key person, please? I'm feeling a little attacked.
We can. I'm just saying, if you go out to buy it, they're going to call it key man insurance.
Is your third string Marco Rubio?
It is. Cool. It is.
Yeah, surprise.
Surprise. You run, here comes the guy.
He's like, sweet, I was waiting for this opportunity. What I was doing now is just a stepping stone towards this.
Right. Well, he's done all the other jobs, so I feel like this will really be an easier lift for him.
Talk about a utility player. Okay. All right. Meredith, should I consider this for my business?
Well, this is a really, really good question. Now, I want to ask you some questions now that we've gone through all this. I'm not actually convinced that very many people are going to be super interested in the actual mechanics of an ESOP. But for you, how do you think about the ESOP? And how are you thinking about it in terms of an exit? What's the plan, Stan?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have been so focused on getting the businesses to get them to where they're really humming, right? And maybe that's a little bit of a fool's errand in that, is it really ever humming, right?
There's always more work to do.
Yeah. But anyway, I've been so focused on, in my mind, getting the business Kitchen and Bath Crate to where it's just really humming. We've been growing a lot over the last 10 years. I always feel like there's the next frontier, whether it be geography or product. And then starting TBS 3 years ago, that's like, oh, well, certainly I'm not thinking of selling or retiring because I'm starting this new thing. It's like if I were to have, I'm 45, if I were to have a kid right now, it'd be like, oh, well, I'm not thinking of anything other than raising this kid, right? I got a new responsibility. So I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about what exiting looks like. And part of that, Meredith, is back to what you and I talked about, maybe episode 3, can't quite recall. But we both really enjoy playing the game of business. We both really enjoy, quote unquote, working. And I say quote unquote because it, to me, honestly, it doesn't feel like work. And so it's like, well, how do you reconcile that feeling of loving the game, having really no intention of not playing the game, no matter if I'm 50 or 70 or 90, right? As long as I can play it. How do you reconcile those feelings with the reality that eventually I will exit, right? I could exit via a coffin. I could exit via selling it. I could exit via it imploding, right? So I probably haven't spent the time thinking about this only because I feel like there's so much else to think about first. Does that seem like I'm trying to get out of answering the question?
No, I think that that's a really realistic answer. And I think that that is the answer that 99% of people, including myself 7 years ago, very honestly, I wasn't thinking about an exit or ramping down. I'm not going to exit entirely, but I'm going to do more of a structured ramp down just to allow me time to do some other things that I want to do. So I think it's a really normal, realistic answer. And I would say, as long as you can answer the question, what would happen if you got hit by a bus? From a control point of view and from a financial point of view, those questions everyone needs to stop and think about because it could happen anytime, right? Beyond that, I don't think you need to know right now at 45 exactly how you're going to exit. But you do know that the ESOP structure is one that you could avail yourself if you wanted to.
Yeah. Another reason this is interesting to me, I get the sense that an ESOP type structure might help alleviate the pressure a sole owner feels. Now, I could be wrong because, Meredith, maybe you feel that exact same pressure. as the sole decision maker for the ESOP and the sole controller of those 100 shares. So I could be wrong in that, but there's an element of it as I listen to you talk that feels like a little bit of a sharing of responsibility that a sole owner like myself maybe doesn't feel. Now, I have some great team members, Jake and Carrie and others, that definitely share in that feeling of responsibility. I'm not trying to imply they don't, but I wouldn't say it's spread throughout the organization very far. Am I sensing that correct, or am I misguided in that notion?
I think a couple things. I think that the ESOP structure doesn't make me feel like the responsibility is shared, but because of traction, that really, really, really got me to create a very official leadership team. And that has made me feel less solely responsible. And that's been really helpful. And also, what I would say about it is I certainly could extricate myself from Here Comes the Guide much easier than you could extricate yourself from Kitchen and Bath Crate. It would be a much lighter lift for me if I was just like, I am OUT. It would be a lot lighter lift for me because of the way that it's structured. So in that way, maybe there is a little bit less of a feeling of crushing responsibility. Like I could go at any time if I wanted to.
Yeah. No, that's true. Yeah, I definitely couldn't be like, screw it, I'm out of here. Well, I could, but it'd just be terrible in a lot of ways.
Exactly. That's a big difference that I think is something to think about. You know, it's easier to extricate, but then you own your entire company. I am not the owner of Here Comes the Guide. And I think there's some big benefits of feeling that no one can take that from you. You own that.
Yeah. I don't know. There's a part of me, though, that feels like it's like owning anything else. Like, so when I graduated from college, I let our father convince me to go buy a new truck. So this was 2003. So I went and bought a fancy ass green Chevy Silverado Z71.
It was a beautiful truck.
It was a beautiful truck. I love that truck. I hated the payment. $565.17 a month. I still remember the amount. Now, in 2003, that was a hefty payment. 2026, not so much. But anyway, my point is I did not get another new truck until about 3 years ago. It took me 20 years to muster up, right? So I get the brand new Ford F-150 Lightning. Love the truck. My point here is after a couple months of owning it, big fancy truck, F-150 Lightning, cool looking and all that jazz. It just kind of, the ownership phase. And I think owning a business can be a little bit like that, where maybe other people are like, oh, that's really cool owning a business. But when you've owned it for 15 years, you're like, yeah, I do. That's what I do. I own the business. And it just kind of loses its luster. So
that's not the piece that interests you. I think it would be a lot harder for both of us if we didn't have the control piece. Right. So, yeah, you don't get up every morning and like, ooh, I own my business. But it would be so much worse if you got up in the morning and it was like, hey, Scott, 5 calls from some Yahoo who does own the business telling you that you have to do X, Y, or Z, or stop doing X, Y, or Z, or hire this asshat because he's my nephew. Or like, for me, I often will be like, should the ownership piece bother me more at Here Comes the Guide? I do think that's part of the reason why growing Currently Reading, my reading and book podcast, has been important, because I wanted to prove to myself that I could start something and grow it. So that piece of it maybe has been important to me. But the ownership of Here Comes the Guide has never been that big a deal to me, because the reality is I just don't want anybody telling me how to run Here Comes the Guide. And nobody can and nobody does. And so for me, that's the biggest difference maker.
By the way, future topic, I would love to do a deep dive in the building of Currently Reading, because listeners out there may or may not know about that podcast, but it's been a phenomenal success and you have done a wonderful job with it. But I'd love to go behind the scenes and learn about how it was built, kind of how you, what's the show with Guy Raz, How I Built This, for a Currently Reading podcast, because you hear about it, you're like, oh, she has a podcast, but it's a beast of a podcast. So you've done a great job with that.
Well, thank you. I love it. And it's been, like you said, the game of business. It's been another chessboard in front of me, and it's continuing to be able to grow. And I feel like I'm looking at my transition out of Here Comes the Guide after almost 30 years of doing it, and currently reading is that newer next level challenge that is really interesting.
Yeah, so cool. Meredith, what would you recommend for listeners as a micro action based on this topic? What's something that they should consider doing in the next few weeks as it relates to this topic of transition, of employee ownership, of those types of things?
Think through some of the things that we've talked about today. Take 15 minutes with maybe a notebook in front of you and figure out, if my employees were owners, would I be doing anything differently? Like I talked about, there are things that I do differently, ways that I approach my employees because they also are owners. And would it affect how much information you share or the way that you make a decision? Because even if you decide that an ESOP structure is not the right thing for your business, I think it does really behoove us as CEOs to think through what would happen if I died, but also, is there a way that I can help my employees feel more invested day to day? And a huge part of that is the way that you treat them. So that's what I would say. Take a few minutes to think through that.
Yeah, and I'll just piggyback on top of that. It's a cliche in business ownership to yearn for employees that act like owners, right? But do they have the same information that you as an owner have? Do they have the authority? Do they have the upside? So I know I've been guilty of wanting or expecting those types of actions without maybe upholding my end of the agreement.
Yeah, the upside piece is a really, really big piece of that. So information and authority are easier to give, but you can't ask people to act like owners if they're not getting a heck of a lot of upside of ownership.
Yeah. Mary, let's transition a little bit to Monday Family Business, where you and I riff a little bit about how these topics parlay into our home of origin and our current households and the way that we are parts of our family, both past and current. As you've been in an ESOP and as you've thought through this structure, any thoughts from how we were raised, how we grew up, what we experienced within our family or within your current family right now?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it comes back to this topic of risk aversion, right? We talked in a previous episode about how our dad, he was an employee of a large university, and that was the one job that he had after college, and he had it all the way until he retired. And he really wanted to be an attorney, but he didn't feel that he could take that risk. And so I think for me, deciding to buy Lynn out when we did was a real moment where I said to myself, yeah, I mean, we're taking out this $1.5 million loan. The company's never had debt before. I'm going to be responsible for making sure that we're financially in a place that we can pay this back. And it felt scary, but then there also was a part of me that's like, man, just nothing good comes without some risk. Put your big girl panties on and just do the thing. Because, again, I will ask, what happens to a dream deferred? If you don't take some risk, I was worried, very frankly, about what would happen to me. Would that little kernel of disappointment and fear and resentment begin to build into something inside me? And so I knew that just continues to be something that pushes me to not be so afraid of risk and instead say, what if the best happens? And also, if it doesn't, we'll figure it out. And yeah. I really think that comes from watching our parents not reach in that same way. When did you realize that you wanted to start your own business as opposed to being an employee at a larger company?
I've gone through writings from especially my college years where it became very evident that that's the direction I wanted to head. I had like diagrams of org charts and descriptions of what the business would look like. And so I'd say a seminal moment was when I was 16 years old and I had a high school econ teacher who recommended the book Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, which is a classic. And I look at that book and that moment as really a turning point in my life towards this idea that we can design and imagine a future and then make it come true. And I don't know what it was about that book or that moment in time. So I think at 16 was when it started. In college is when it really started to take root. But then after college, I spent 8 years as an employee. at a medium-sized family-owned company. And so I learned some really valuable lessons. It was really well ran. The ownership was fantastic, just wonderful people. And so I picked up so many tools at that job about how to treat customers, how to treat team members. And I always felt very valued there, which is something that will forever remember. But then at some point, you realize it was the teeth of the 08-09 downturn, and I was 28, 29 years old, and I was laying off superintendents that were in their 50s and 60s and driving them home and dropping them off in front of these 5,000 square foot homes that they had just purchased, because in 06, 07, everybody was buying 5,000 square foot homes. Dropping off a 55-year-old because he no longer has a truck, because he had a company truck, right? So you have to drop him off at his home that he no longer can pay the mortgage on, and shaking his hand and walking away. And there was an element of that, Meredith, that I felt for him, but it's like, listen, that's not going to be me. I feel for you, bro, but if I fail, it's going to be because I failed and not because someone told me my time was up. And so that desire to bet on myself, I think, is the root of it. And I think it started at 16 and took root in college. That's my timeline of developing an ownership desire.
Yeah, I remember we went on a trip to Hawaii with our grandparents paid for us to go on a trip to Hawaii, and Devin was 4, so I was 25, so you were 18. And I remember having some conversations on that trip about, I had just started working at Here Comes the Guide, and I was talking to you about the fact that there were some real differences in opinion as to the way that I thought work should be being done and the way that our founder did. And I remember you saying, yeah, I just really want to be able to do work the way that I think that the work needs to be done. And I was like, you and me both, brother. You and me both. So I'm really glad that we were both able to make that happen.
Yeah. And I just want to encourage the listeners out there. We say this all the time, but listen to those internal voices as you're picking your path or choosing your next direction or taking on the next role or the next responsibility, because it's very satisfying. It's difficult along the way, but it's very satisfying. So don't ignore those desires along the way. Make sure that you live those out and don't live with regret.
Yeah. What happens to a dream deferred?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So Meredith, appreciate your time in talking through this. I learned a ton about an ESOP and what it is. And here comes the guide's transition and story around that. Any final takeaways on the topic before we close out here?
No, I'm glad that we talked about it. I hope that it has spurred in somebody the desire to at least think through, is there a structure that could help me move my business to the next level?
Yeah. All right. So, Mayor, we have a good one next week. I'm excited to explore this topic of scaling your business or not, right? This idea that not all businesses can scale, not all businesses should scale, not all owners and founders and operators are wired to scale. So we're going to dive deeply into that topic to make sure people are once again choosing the path that is true and right for them and their company, as opposed to what the headlines and the social media tells us we should do with our business.
Yeah, I am very interested in this topic. I have a lot of what I think are fairly spicy takes because I very particularly have and plan to continue to keep Here Comes the Guide small. All right, that is a wrap on another episode of Monday Next. This was a good one, Scott. I'm glad that we were able to talk it through. But before we sign off, I want to make sure you can find us between episodes. You can find me at Meredith Monday Schwartz on Instagram. And if you want to hear me talk about books instead of business, join me for the Currently Reading podcast.
You can connect with me on Instagram and TikTok at Scott Monday, or even better on my Substack, which is scottmonday.substack.com. There I write weekly about building businesses, changing culture, implementing AI, and applying systems to your family and your personal life. And then, of course, you can follow this show over on Instagram at Monday Next Podcast.
If you're enjoying our conversations, the biggest thing you can do for us is to tell someone about it. Word of mouth is the absolute best way for us to get new listeners.
You can also help us out by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts and sharing the show on your socials. That's a wonderful way for us to gather some new listeners.
And if you've thought about employee ownership, or if you've actually done it, or maybe you have a different structure that you use, send us a DM. We would love to hear about your experience.
Yeah, so next week, once again, we'll be talking about to scale or not to scale. That is the question.
Yes, we are going to have some big, big answers. Until Monday next, keep being audacious.